Hermela Aragawi, an independent Ethiopian-American journalist, and we're talking about the changing international economic system. Now, the United States dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that's a big deal because that means we can keep printing money for as long as we want and artificially prop up our economy. But as soon as the rest of the world stops using the dollar, the American dollar, as the reserve currency, that all goes away, and that is starting now. And Joe Biden and the Democrats and the establishment are making that happen. So what undergirds our dollar is the petrodollar, meaning Saudi Arabia, the biggest oil exporter in the world, has made an agreement with the United States going back to 1973 that said, or 71 maybe, that said the Saudi Arabia gets to use our military anywhere they want, and in exchange for that, when Saudi Arabia sells oil, they will only accept U.S. dollars in payment. So if you were in India and you wanted to buy Saudi American oil, you'd have to change your money to dollars and then buy it, which means that every country in the world has on reserve billions of American dollars, millions, if not billions, of American dollars, which that artificially inflates our dollars. So that's going away because we're pushing this with this Ukraine war, right? So we're trying to, the United States, Joe Biden and the capitalists are trying to put a hurt on Russia and China. It's backfiring spectacularly. It's not backfiring in the sense that the military-industrial complex and the fossil fuel companies, which want this war, aren't profiting. They are profiting. It's very handsomely profiting.
Oh, thank God.
But what's hurting is the country. But that's for the last 50 years, our country's leaders have been screwing our own country, which is why China makes all the stuff. We took all our good manufacturing jobs, turned them into shitty paying jobs, and sent them to China. And then we import all that stuff back here. They got a tax break to do that. So to cut the legs out from underneath the working class in America, our government gave those corporate evil bastards a tax break to do it. So this is all part of it, right? It's not about helping America become better. It's about putting money into the pockets of the crony capitalists who run this actual government. It's not run by Joe Biden, okay? Joe Biden doesn't even know what he had for breakfast.
He doesn't even know where Doug is.
That's right. So why are protesters in Ethiopia and Mali waving Russian flags? I'm going to guess. It's because Russia's not trying to blow them up or fund terrorists to overthrow their governments, and they're actually trying to invest in their country. Maybe that's why. Let's see. This is, by the way, this is from 2021. That's how long ago that headline was. Perspective. Why are Haitian protesters waving Russian flag? Oh, do you see that happening in Russia? South Africa's blames NATO for Russia's war in Ukraine. Look at that. The power of BRICS and South Africa will go ahead with joint naval exercises, including Russia. So what is BRICS? BRICS is a bunch of countries that are now going to make an economic pact together against the United States and the West. So it's Russia, China, Brazil, India, South Africa. This is bad for the dollar. It's called BRICS. South Africa is set to welcome Russian warships. China and Russia are bringing their growing military cooperation to Africa. So we're losing the continent to China and Russia's influence. Why? Because we don't want to help build up Africa. We want to keep them poor and riddled with terrorists and dictators because that they're easier to control than democratic elected governments. That's the whole reason.
We won't settle for mere debt slavery. We want the whole thing.
That's right.
We want the whole thing.
And so now Africa is waking up, and they're now aligning with people who actually have a better interest for them. China and Russia have set out to bring their growing defense ties to Africa, in which both powers have increasingly invested their economic, political, and military capital. China, Russia, and South Africa announced last week their intentions to hold 10-day trilateral naval exercises off the southern coast of Africa, a plan that has raised concerns among Following talks with his South African counterpart in Pretoria, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov defended the drills as a natural development development in which 3 sovereign countries, without violating any norms of international law, conducted exercises. He suggested that only probably our American colleagues would take issue because they believe that only they can conduct exercises around the world. And to prove that, U.S. and Japan prepare for joint exercises in the South China Sea. The top Russian diplomat said that Moscow was in favor of each country having its own rights in the international system as stipulated by the UN Charter, and it is on such grounds, not dictate, but equality, not the imposition of decisions, but consensus, the search for balance of interests, that we develop our cooperation, including within the BRICS framework. So that's Russia talking. Following Lavrov's remarks, South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor took a similar position on the upcoming joint exercises, which she called just a natural set of exercises that occurs between countries that have such relationships. She referred to earlier comments in which she asserted that Africans need to resist the impulse of wanting to direct the double standard for our international conduct toward us, that what I do is okay for me, but you cannot do it because you are a developing country or you are Africa. That is an abuse of international practice, Pandor said. All countries conduct military exercises with friends worldwide. The ambassador of South Africa in Russia said that about 13 countries are interested in joining BRICS. They added that 6 countries have already submitted formal applications for membership. So let me bring in Hermala. What do you make of all this?
I think it's great. I mean, I think BRICS is the only really strategic counter to this, U.S.-centered international order that we've seen for the last 3 decades. And it's significant because the 5 countries that are part of it, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now South Africa, represent about 40% of the global population, about a quarter of the global GDP. And right now, if you're a developing country, you're sort of in this cycle because you do need money to develop. So you need the IMF or the World Bank to be able to give you money, but that money is stipulated on whether there's certain legal or political happenings in your country to the US's liking, often has nothing to do with what's good for the people, and in order to decide that you are worthy of a country that's even able to develop. So there's that. And then if you are not falling in line politically, then they sanction you, they pull you out of all kinds of trade bills like they did with Ethiopia when they were fighting the rebels. And so BRICS is this alternative for development. There's a new development bank that these countries have come together and formed. It's nothing compared to what the IMF or the World Bank has, but they have come together and set aside about $100 billion for infrastructure projects around the world. So now you can go to this bank instead of just the IMF and World Bank. And that is something that particularly for African countries who are just so incredibly underdeveloped and have been exploited for decades, very resource rich, but very underdeveloped, this is good news. This is creating more of equity around the world, but it still has a long way to go. And I'm not surprised to hear that there's several countries that want to be a part of it. It's a human rights issue for the continent, and it's really something that's urgent because people are dying because they don't have clean water, they don't have access to water, they don't have food. And so I think that this will be good for the conversation around what happens in the global South, particularly in Africa.
What do you make of the African countries now aligning with Russia and China over aligning with the United States?
Like the U.S. literally has done nothing for itself. I mean, it's done very little. Okay, I'm going to say in terms of winning the hearts of Africans. I mean, I can speak most confidently to what happened in Ethiopia. Majority of Ethiopians, large majority of Ethiopians in the United States were so favorable to the U.S. They had no idea how involved the U.S. was in propping up this dictatorship for 27 years. They thought it was mostly this group. I mean, yes, with some complicity from the U.S., but they assumed when the transition happened in 2018 and this group fell, that the U.S. government would just kind of let it be, that they would never support this kind of war war for them to get back into the country. And then you've got the media apparatus gaslighting everybody and telling them that they're the problem. They want to see all these people in the Tigray region genocided and starved to death, when in fact they were just supporting the government that the people wanted to be able to maintain the country. So not surprised at all. I mean, there's just been so much abuse. In December, when they had the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in D.C., what came out of it was just so little. They said they committed $55 billion over the course of 3 years for a continent of 1.3 billion people. I mean, when you compare that to what they're just slanging out to Ukraine, it's absolutely nothing. And then even that under 20 billion a year for the continent is based on all of these metrics and stipulations that the countries have to meet, but they're not development metrics. They're just, whether they're aligning politically with the United States or not. And one of those things is probably whether they are taking the side of Russia in the Ukraine war, or whether they're not explicitly condemning Russia, which a lot of them are like bullied to do.
Well, I mean, what do you make of the Joe Biden administration and their effect on Africa? I mean, obviously Joe Biden is not running things, and I wonder who actually is. It's not. So obviously, it's not him or Kamala Harris who's running things. So there's other people running things. What do you make of Joe Biden's relationship with Africa and his effect on it?
Oh, it's been a game changer in a very negative way. I mean, these last couple of years have created a sentiment among, Americans or people in the West of African origins that this government is completely anti, the continent and anti the people of Ethiopia in particular, a country of 120 million people. It's made people say Trump was so much better for Africa. And in a sense, he was a little bit more hands off. So it allowed this transition to happen. I don't know that this 2018 transition, it was kind of a miracle. I mean, this group had so much power in the country. A lot of Ethiopians will tell you, we just thought they would never go. Like, they had just completely lost hope. And so the fact that this transition happened during the Trump era is so interesting.
Oh, she froze.
Good for the continent per se, but he's just was not as involved in dictating the political terms of at least a country like Ethiopia that I'm familiar with. So the Biden administration, absolutely disastrous, and they're still so tone deaf. So they had this whole, PR stunt with the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, but at the back end of it, they're really non-committal. They just wanted the photo op with all of these leaders, and I just don't get it. I guess it's the absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's just the sense that if they can just get away with it because they've been getting away with it for a long time. But this is a different population you're dealing with. I mean, the last 2 years of war went differently because it's a different population you're dealing with. There's social media. There's people like me in media that are able to discern what's real and what's not. And instead, they literally pulled out the 1980s 91 playbook. And I feel like the U.S. Policy on Africa is also stuck 30 years ago. So I really don't know what it's going to take for them to actually adjust their policies. But in the meantime, Russia and China are running circles around the country, on the continent.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, Hermela Aragawi. You can check her out. What's your YouTube show?
Hermela TV. We're doing more interviews on there, so please check it out. Thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on and keeping us up to date what's happening in Ethiopia and Africa in general. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Same. Thank you so much.
Hey, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, Tempe, Arizona, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Nashville, Northampton, Massachusetts, and a lot more places. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets and become a premium member while you're there. You get access to all of our stuff. See you then.